Go into the formal session at 5. We got quite a few things to get done here, and I know they'll be done in an orderly, efficient manner. Let's start out with the first briefing, eminent domain legislation. Rebecca Cooper.
Good afternoon.
John Moss put a big grin on his face because he asked for this, and we got it. You asked for it, we did it.
Notice he's laying back, ready for it.
We're delighted to have you.
Thank you, sir. So I was asked to give a briefing on the eminent domain bills that are before the General Assembly this year. There are 4 of them that are currently pending. There's 2 of them that the staff would recommend opposition to, and there's 2 that we do not take a position on or don't have any opposition to. The first is Senate Bill it's Senate Bill 237. It affects the Property Owners Association Act. It has to do with the valuation of open space. The patron is Senator Peterson, and it is currently in the Courts of Justice Committee. The second is Senate Bill 478, eminent domain reimbursement of costs. The patron is Senator Obenshain, and it also is in the Courts of Justice Committee. Those are the 2 that I'll be explaining in more detail some concerns that we have about the effects. The next is Senate Bill 543, inverse condemnation proceedings, reimbursement of owner's costs. We have no objection to that one. And Senate Bill 109, eminent domain proceedings, commissioners to be summoned at least 30 days prior to trial. More of a process improvement measure. So with Senate Bill 237, this affects the Virginia Property Owners Association Act. And in Section 55-516.2 of the Virginia Code, there's a recommended change to that section. So right now what that section does is it just says when there's property being acquired from a homeowners association, so in a neighborhood that has some open space in the neighborhood that's owned by the homeowners association, the association is the one that the condemnor would deal with. What this proposed bill is adding is it's adding the language that's underlined that says, in valuing the common area that is affected, the fact finder shall take into account all relevant circumstances, including the value of those neighboring properties that hold easements. And the issue, I'm going to go into some detail there about what that really is doing. So the effect generally is that it takes the judge's discretion away of what's relevant in a trial. And every trial is different. Every acquisition is different. And this would allow adjacent property values to come into evidence whether or not they may have any bearing on the case or on the particular value. Just compensation is what is to be determined at any of these eminent domain trials, and generally that is the market value of what that piece is, so what a willing buyer would pay to a willing seller on the open market. Appraisers who are trying to determine what that is generally look to the property's benefits and its detriments, all of the things that are good about it, all of the challenges that it may have, and then they assign a value. They generally do not look to the immediate adjacent property unless it's a circumstance where it happens to be a very similar piece of property that would be deemed to be what we would call a comparable sale. So usually the appraisers will look at market sales and try to find ones throughout the city that are as similar to the property as possible and assign a value. So we've recently been We've seen this a couple of times, and we've been aware that it's being used in a couple of other cases throughout the state of an appraisal methodology that instead of looking at the intrinsic value of that homeowners association open space piece, they are looking to all the neighboring properties in the neighborhood and assigning a value, essentially saying all of these homes that had the right to use that are somehow damaged, and so we're going to take that damage and apply it and use that to establish the value. And it can result in some pretty unusual values that may not be all that reliable. So in order to sort of illustrate it for you, I decided to use an example. This is the Princess Anne Meadows subdivision plat that recently came before council. So in this, it's a platted subdivision, and there's some blue lines over on the far side that indicate a future road going through. So there's an area of open space right next to the future road that is adjacent to the lake. And right to the top of that in the blue square is a cemetery. And so assume that the city, when they come through, if we build that road, need to acquire some of that open space. So the red area would represent what we would be acquiring. So assume that's what we're going to be acquiring. And if we were acquiring it today before any homes are built, we would probably go to the developer, look at the value of the land, and maybe pay, let's just say, assume $20,000 for the purposes of this example. It would be appraised, and we would look at the values, of course, for what that might be. Under Senate Bill 237, under this methodology that we're concerned about, the Homeowners Association appraiser could have valued that based upon claiming a certain damage to each of those units. So in this subdivision, there's 80 different lots. So essentially 80 times a certain number that they assign as damage to the homes. So once this is all developed, if we were, well, let me stop. So rather than considering what this little red rectangle is worth, looking at its size, looking at the fact that it's next to a cemetery, looking at the fact that it does or does not have any improvements on it, instead, the appraiser would look to the value of those neighboring properties that hold easements. That's the language that's being included in Senate Bill 237. So assume the home values, once they get built, at the time we're building this road, is sometime in the future and this is fully built out. If they're all around $300,000, and if the appraiser says, okay, I'm going to claim 5%. We've seen values at somewhere between 1 and 10% in the ones that we've seen in this methodology. So 5% damage to each of these 80 homes. So a total of $15,000 per home. That math would yield a value from that appraiser of $1.2 million for that rectangle. However, if the Homeowners Association were buying it, it's doubtful that they would pay that amount. Probably if they didn't own it now and were trying to buy it, they might pay something closer to that $20,000. Virginia Beach is home to a number of large subdivisions, many of whom have these easements in the open space. Some of them are very large. And the thing about this methodology is that same size rectangle could change in value if, say, another phase gets developed later on and you add 200 more homes. Do you do the same math and say now 280 homes times that? We have Castleton has 770 homes, Courthouse Estates has 1,100 homes, Green Run has 4,200 homes, and Indian Lakes has 1,600. So even a small acquisition from any of those open space areas could yield extremely high values just because of the multiplier, even if you're only getting to a 0.5% damage for each. So if a judge believed that this appraisal methodology was misleading, or in a certain case because the neighborhood's so large, not really relevant in that case, the concern is that this bill would prevent that judge from excluding that evidence. More importantly, relevant evidence is already admissible. So the language in this bill says relevant evidence including, these adjacent properties. But if that's not already relevant, then, it's up to the judge to decide. So if it's relevant, it already would come in anyway. It's not being barred now. It just would be up to each particular court to decide in each particular case. And they would most likely be the better position to decide. So our analysis, the staff analysis of this, is that it would result in significantly increased project costs in those projects that deal with open space. And we might see this in road projects as that example, but we also might see it in stormwater projects. A lot of the open spaces include the BMPs that were actually asked to come in and help fix sometimes. And we might see it in utility projects if there are utility upgrades that need to be had. So by allowing this into evidence, it would likely increase the value of those acquisitions in those types of cases. So we would recommend allowing city staff to oppose this bill.
Questions or comments on this
Go
one?
back to the legislation itself, the actual wording. I think about the people, you say the existing law is sufficient, but I know how poorly the people at the London Bridge Road exit off 264 were treated. And they had to go to the Supreme Court to get their relevant evidence included. So I don't think the courts have been overly generous in helping property owners with relevant evidence against the state. At least the track record doesn't show that. The state always gets favorable treatment. That seems to be the outcome in most of those cases until they go to the Supreme Court. So I don't know that when you say that, I don't think there's a history that says that really happens. What is the real, and that percentage, that's just something, that's not in the law, correct?
It's not in the law. We've been involved in 2 cases. We've seen a range. We've heard of others. I didn't go and do a survey of the
They have to
cases.
be able to establish a methodology empirically based that whatever methodology used has credibility, correct?
But in some cases, the judge, and in one of our cases, the judge determined that it didn't have credibility and that appraisal, for a number of reasons, it's not as simple as that, but was not allowed to be presented. It was, so this law might change that in the next time it comes
I
up.
applaud the discretion piece. I'm just looking for the consistency, because we have this law in the state that says people have no standing to get suicide records because the judges have no discretion to review an administrative decision, and we thought that's a great idea. Now we're saying we think the court's having the discretion about what to admit and not to admit is a good idea. Are judges smart or are judges not smart? I'm having a hard time. It seems like judge discretion is appropriate depending upon what position we're advocating. And so I'm not clear in my own mind, Mr. Mayor, that people who have property rights, I think, are entitled to bring other thoughts. And let's just give an example. Let's just say you had a lake, and the lake was part of the open space, which is often the case. But their taking was taking the land, so the usable open space was being significantly deteriorated, but they still have the drainage pond. Well, that does materially influence and impact the situation. Now, you could say, well, that's relevant evidence that could be included, but history has suggested that absent some explicit expression, the judges defer to the state's reasoning, not to the property owner's reasoning. And I think that's why you see some of these laws coming up, is because of, are there examples that drove this? What, usually, is it the farmer up in Stanton or whatever it was? So usually there's some examples of where people have been abused by eminent domain that caused these legislations to be proposed. Do we know why this senator sponsored this bill?
I don't. I do know that Senator Peterson is a practicing eminent domain attorney. He may have had a case. He may know somebody who did. I don't know. I don't know the reason it's come up. I do know sometimes there are cases like that. And these homeowners association properties are, I think, a difficult appraisal problem. But I don't know that legislation to allow adjacent properties to be included in that value where it may or may not be relevant is the answer to that.
Well, I think what we should say, since we aren't well informed, our position ought to be that the state, they should take no action, and they should ask the JLARC or someone to study the pros and cons, because clearly these people are trying to protect property rights, which is our job under the Constitution, not to protect the city, but to protect property rights, but not to the extent that it doesn't make sense. But just hearing one side of the story, I'm not opposed to saying this shouldn't pass because it needs more study. That's not the same thing as I say, and I says I don't think there isn't merit to the
Does anyone
argument.
object that we say no action on this one? Sounds okay to me. Are you okay with that, Becky?
I am. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
let's go to the next one.
All right, so the next one is a proposed change to Virginia Code Section 25.1245, and this is a provision that allows costs to be awarded at the end of a trial to basically reimbursement of the property owner's costs in certain circumstances. So right now, what the law is that they would get certain costs. It would be expert witness costs, and usually that would be appraisers or engineers, that sort of thing. Attorneys' fees are not allowed. And they are only allowed if the award at trial is 30% or more over the condemner's written offer. So there has to be a period of negotiation. The condemnor makes an offer in writing, and it has to be within 60 days of getting that written appraisal. And the owner must provide a written appraisal under this one. Back in 2007, you didn't used to get, if you were a property owner, you didn't used to get the appraisal fees. It was changed in 2007, but there was an objection from the condemning authority side, because a lot of times they were never given written appraisals, and so it's hard to evaluate. You have to be making a decision to respond to somebody's counteroffer, and if you don't have anything in writing documenting why you should have that, you can't document your file for your federal and state money for the project. You have a lot of things that you have to go through. So what this law would do is it would take, so on this side on the side closest to me, current law of what we have, you need award greater than 30% over the condemning authority's written offer. If the offer is made 60 days after the written appraisal, owner's appraisal must be in writing, and it gives you up to 3 experts. So what the change would do is it changes both the threshold and the measure against the threshold. So you have the threshold now lowered to 20%, but it's not over that written offer after getting a written appraisal. It's 20% over the city's initial offer. And I'll tell you a little while, the process of why that's a little difficult for us to think that would be workable. No written appraisal will be required anymore under this bill, and it allows more than 3 experts if the city offers more. So, more experts. So if we were to offer 5, they would get up to 5. So a little bit about the eminent domain process to understand what this really does. First thing in a project, your plans are drawn, your plats are drawn, and those plats and plans are given to the appraiser, and he goes out and looks at each of the properties, or she, and makes an estimated value. And sometimes, and it actually happens pretty often, the appraiser is not given the right to go into the property to get full access to the property. They write a letter to the property owner and says, come meet us out there, walk around with us, tell us what we need to know. And some people don't take them up on that, and in fact, bar them from going into certain parts of the property. And sometimes the appraiser will request leases or any other types of information that they just don't get right away. The offer is then made based on the city's written appraisal, and we are required to provide that written appraisal with the offer. And the city's right-of-way agent then begins to negotiate with the property owner. And sometimes the property owner participates in that. Sometimes they don't. We don't even hear a response. And sometimes they get their own appraisal, and sometimes they don't. Often they don't. So if the parties can't reach an agreement, then a condemnation certificate is filed, and that's what gives the city the right to go on the property. And it gets recorded in the land records, and that is often about 6 months after that first appraisal was done, because we needed enough time to try to work it out with the property owner. The certificate is the date of valuation that's to be used in trial, so that's the important date. So then there has to be immediately a new appraisal done to bring that appraisal up to date to the date of appraisal. So you can't go to court with that first one, you have to go to court with an update. And oftentimes that one will go up because now the appraiser may have some more information that he didn't have the first time. It may have gotten to go inside the property. But a lot of times it stays the same, sometimes it changes. And then the petition for condemnation is filed after that. At some point then you have your litigation starting. So before 2007, as I said, appraisal costs weren't recoverable, and then they required this written appraisal to be provided. Before 2007, we almost never got a written appraisal. We wouldn't find out what the other side's value was and what the basis was until we went into depositions, which sometimes was a few weeks before trial, a few days before trial in some cases. And it's really difficult to analyze that and to settle a case if you don't have any basis for why they're claiming a number, especially when you need to document your file for those state and federal authorities who are, have the right of audit to go through. So written appraisals, they're more concrete. They're easier for us to kind of see where we may have missed something, where the parties can find a common ground, and they help us get to settlement faster. So Senate Bill 478, another issue is these experts. It would require the city to pay for the expert witness fees up to as many as we offer, which sounds fair, but sometimes, and it may be, but this, the concern we have is oftentimes we start out our initial designation of experts as only one or two experts, appraiser and maybe someone else if we think it might help establish the evidence the best. And then if the property owner designates more, they bring in a broker or a surveyor or somebody else who we need to then respond to, we then up our number to match theirs to make sure that we have all the evidence before the deciding body, whether it's a jury or a commission. So we don't have an objection with respect to this one, except that you should look at the initial designations as being key. So if the city, for example, we would request a change to this language in the bill if they wanted to up it to more, would be it's based on the initial designation. So if the city designates 2 and then the property owner designates 5 and we have to add 3 just to kind of respond to those, then keep it at that 3 max for that situation. There we go. So Senate Bill 478, if adopted, it would create a law where this could happen, and this is our main concern. Say the city's initial offer and the certificate is filed in the amount of $7,000, and the landowner has an appraiser who values it at $350,000, and there's no written appraisal done, and we don't really find out the basis for it until we get into court, and the city offers to settle for $15,000 at any point in that period of time, and we're refused, and then we go to trial. So these numbers up to this point are all actual numbers taken out of a specific case. I've rounded them for ease, but they're pretty generally about where we are with one case that we have. So in that case, if the verdict comes in at $9,000, it's clear from that the jury didn't really buy that $350,000 appraisal, but we would still be on the hook for all these costs, even though that's less than what we offered. So the concern there is we shouldn't be setting up the law to where this type of thing could happen. So the practical effect would be we're going to have more litigation because it's just going to be harder to settle these cases. It allows the property owner not to provide a written appraisal, which I think helps the process along a lot better. So this bill would effectively prevent us from reaching settlement. I'm concerned that city staff may be tempted to increase the initial offer if that's what you're basing it on before you even start your negotiations, because you don't want to run the risk that you're going to have to pay the costs 2 years down the line. We may be chilled from calling more experts because of the costs, and the threat of cost may encourage us to settle for numbers that we don't really feel that good about. So our staff analysis on this one is because of the increased project costs, we would request that or recommend that you authorize the city staff to object to this
That
one
appeared
as well.
to be a good analysis that you just gave.
Should oppose this thing. This is a bad.
Okay, does anyone disagree with opposing?
Okay, thank you.
You're rolling, young lady.
And the other two, we don't recommend opposing, and I'll tell you what they do. Proposed change to Virginia Code 25.1420. So this deals with inverse condemnation. So if somebody has a taking to their property and they weren't paid and it wasn't part of that process through direct eminent domain that I just talked about, they can bring a declaratory judgment action that says whether there was or wasn't a taking or damage to their property that they should get paid for. There's a similar cost reimbursement provision, but instead it also allows attorney's fees. And right now what it says is the words "and damages" are left out of that provision. So if you win that case, you wouldn't get your damages paid for. if it's not, because it's not in the code section. So this is just adding the words "and damages" to this cost provision. Right now, it's only if you have a taking, which is kind of full, taking all use, all beneficial use of that property. A damage might be you're taking some of the rights of that property, but you haven't reached quite that taking yet. So throughout the whole code, there's taking and damage through the Constitution, through lots of different places, and so this would just match that up.
So it's just a cleanup, basically?
I think it may be changing the law a little bit, because the General Assembly can decide whether they want to authorize damage in some cases and not others. But it does seem to be that it was an oversight, I would guess.
Everyone okay with that? Okay. Let's move on, please.
And then the last one is a process one right now, that when you have a commission, which are hand-selected by each side, you toss a coin and see who gets the number of commissioners. Those commissioners are essentially the jury for the case. They, right now, have to be summoned no later than a week before trial. But oftentimes you have trouble getting a full panel in there, because it's not enough time in this day and age to get everybody to make arrangements for being away, or having, they may be out of the country for that week, getting service on people. So what this will do is change it to 30 days. I understand this has already passed in the Senate. I think this one is going to fly through. So, and that's all I have.
Thank you very much for getting that update.
Thank you.
That's what we're here to do. Thank you. Okay. Transit-oriented development case studies, Brian.
Mayor, if you don't mind, we're going to do a little bit of switching around just in the interest of time. I know we're trying to be out of here at 5 o'clock, and we've got some guests from out of town.
Okay.
Ms. Glassman is here with, you all know, Continental Research has been doing analysis, doing a citizen survey for, past 20 years or so, since 1995. And so they did a survey in October, and she's here to give you the results of what they learned.
Look like we're doing pretty good in my book.
It's a good life in Virginia Beach.
Yes, it is.
Do you want to revise my time schedule?
Well, here's what we're going to,
I'm from Chicago.
As a practical matter, we would like you to go quickly, but I think we're probably not going to have time for the transit-oriented development in all likelihood. We'll play it by ear, but take the time you need, but
I'll talk
the
fast.
mayor likes quick.
Hey.
All right. So, we're here today to find out how residents feel about the community, and more specifically, the services that you provide. Just a quick little outline. And we're going to talk a little bit about the background and methodology. I'm going to highlight some of the survey results. We do not have time for all of them. Talk a little bit about what drives satisfaction with taxpayers, some geographic breakdowns, and then a little quick summary. To give you some background, this benchmark study was started in 1995. I was much younger. This research involves a lot of scientific protocols, and if I took the time to tell you that, we wouldn't have time for the results, but I am available to answer questions if you have any. This was an extraordinarily long survey. It was 19 minutes long, but we have always been able to get away with that in Virginia Beach because people like to participate and tell the city how they feel. These were randomly selected households. Survey was very well received. Very few people said they didn't have time or couldn't do it. They were into it. Surveyed 520 households. That was landline and cell phone, and in these days, cell phones are very important. The study has an excellent margin of error. At one end, it would be less than 1% margin of error, and then at a question that has a 50-50 type of response, half said yes, half said no, the greatest margin of error is 4.3%. Our report displayed everything since 2003, because 1995 is a lot to fit on a page, and the font would be ever so small. But we do have all of the other data if you need anything. A more detailed analysis was provided than what you're seeing. In addition to the PowerPoint, there's a main report, and then there are supplementary reports that break it out, for example, by zip code and other things. Participants in this survey rated 30 city services and characteristics. The choices to when we asked the questions were very satisfied, satisfied, dissatisfied, or very dissatisfied. Or if a person really felt they didn't know, they could say don't know. To summarize and for speed today, we've taken the very satisfied plus the satisfied, and I'm going to refer to that as the percent of people that are satisfied. Now, localities often look for 80% satisfaction, 20% opportunity still. And in this case, of the 30 things that we addressed, and we addressed some nitty-gritty stuff, like, traffic roads stuff. So 19 of the 30 services were above that 80% threshold. To show you the breakdown, this is really fun because 6 of the 30 had over 95% of the people that we interviewed saying that they were satisfied with it. 9 were between 90 and 95, 7 between 80 and 89, and the 9 between 70 and 79, it's going to be exactly what you would expect. And then we had 2 that were fewer than 70% satisfied. But the overall question, how satisfied are you with city services overall, had 94% being satisfied. Now, I always tell my localities this. When I present something in descending order, it's for speed. It is not to compare departments, because there are no good guys and bad guys in this. The fact is, certain things will always rise to the top by the nature of what they
A
do.
little bit harder, Jim.
Yeah, I'm just thinking the cops are not gonna like this.
It's the nature of how these things usually shake out, nothing atypical here. Okay, the top things that were above 95%. Fire department, paramedic and rescue, and public libraries, those are almost always in the top 5. It's just what they do. I mean, they save the day, think about it. Rec centers, museums, and the 911 emergency telephone center, next in line. Now, 2013 was a banner year, so last time I presented to you, the numbers had really zoomed up. So what I'm telling you today is that these numbers I'm presenting here are very similar to that. In other words, you didn't just peak and then go back, you peaked and you stayed there. So I'm not showing you today a lot of significant improvements, but the fact is it's because the numbers stayed steady from what was already a very high number. Let's look at the levels between 90 and 95%. I'm really into the third one down, overall appearance of the city, because when I go around to different localities and I look at the communities, if you find a community that looks as amazing as Virginia Beach, you know that this is a place where a lot of people want to live. I like that the 90.4% one, Virginia is such a nice community. When we ask them about their neighborhood, the overall appearance of their neighborhood, I had 90.4% saying they were satisfied with that.
Yeah, I don't mean to interrupt you, but we did just brag about EMS and fire, but I would think that score on the police department this day and time is extremely strong.
It is.
And I think that should be noticed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If I weren't racing through this, I would.
I like the courtesy of city employees, too.
I'd love to.
Yeah, and that's, I'm going to tell you a little bit about that
Too.
in a minute, about the courtesy and how important that is.
I noticed you left the city council off at 100%.
It just wasn't room on the slide for it. Okay, so still good, the 80 to 89%. Again, it's above that 80% threshold, which is what we always target. The 311 public beaches, you have awesome beaches in Virginia Beach, really. Trash collection and recycling, public schools, the kinds of things that you would expect in this range. And we'll look now at the next slide, which is the things that fell below the 80. Okay, some of these things, the nature of them, they almost can't or won't be above 80. It's just the nature of what we're measuring here. I have the second item down, the drinking water and wastewater collection. I just have to tell you anecdotally, I'm not sure why this is, but I listened to a lot of the interviews and I listened to some of the tapes and so forth. I'm hearing some water comments and I don't really know what that means. So I think it slipped just a little bit. Job opportunities at 76.9%. Really, I don't see that in a lot of places, so that's very good. Working with other communities on regional issues. In the comment section, there were a few people that made some suggestions for doing that more, but still that score is not bad. Services for needy or homeless families, planning for residential development. It is almost impossible to get a high score on planning and construction for new city roads because that's, it's a funding issue, it's all kinds of things. It's very difficult to stay ahead of that. Maintenance of city roads and bridges, it's a very tough thing. I don't even know what to say, but it would be very hard.
Can you go back though one second and talk a little bit about schools? If there are any
Absolutely.
insights you have, because I would have thought, given all the awards, and we have just a super school system of things that we do with academies. If you have any insights you could share, maybe later, that would be interesting to better, that wasn't what I would be expecting.
Well, I think that's a pretty high score, though, isn't it?
It is a very high
It
score.
would be not disappointing, but I was just thinking, given what I always hear from people, it's just caught me off guard a little bit.
85.8% satisfaction with the schools is very high. And I would say that that's awesome. And try to remember too, with schools, that's one of those things where everybody pays taxes for it, but not everybody uses it. And so a lot of people have opinions about it who don't have firsthand knowledge.
One interesting thing, if you have a chance to look at the report on page 65, are the dissatisfied comments, and there's a whole section on schools.
Yeah.
And it kind of tells you a little bit about what some of those people were thinking.
Yeah. If someone was dissatisfied with something, we always asked, would you care to make a comment? And we wrote down any comments. All right, let's go back to the satisfaction below 80% slide. I want to just talk about the bottom one there, because I just hate it that anybody has to be at the bottom. But the fact is, the flow of traffic in the city, the history on that is positive. So let me just read you, starting in 2003, the every other year statistic of what that number used to be. 39.2, 32.8, 36.0, 39.6, 40.2, last survey was 51.6, today we're at 50.4. So strides, great strides. It's just that it happens to still be at the bottom of the list. It's the nature of it. Okay. This is where I have to remind you, those global questions that we ask on a survey are very important. Overall, how satisfied are you with city services? And in this case, we had 94% being satisfied. So we have to do little analysis. Sometimes I only do them in my office and don't tell anybody. But regression analysis is a fun kind of thing that we like to do. We have statistical software that does cool things. What we did was we fed in everything on the survey and we said, tell us statistically what predicts, what helps drive overall satisfaction. And here are the top 6 things in order. Top 1, when they interact with your employees. That's the number 1 driver of overall satisfaction. That just shows the human element in all of this. Very important, and you do so well with it. 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, I can't tell you why they're in that order, but these are very important things. It's what the community considers when they're looking at their overall perception.
I really got number 3. Have their residents have
Having an opportunity to share their opinion, very important. All right, next slide. We ask people if they used certain city services in the past 12 months, and the reason those questions are on there, it's not because we don't know how many people go to your rec centers, you know that. It's so that we can analyze the data. We divide things up. So in this case, we had 80% of the people saying they visited a public beach, 75.6 saying they used a city park, and so forth. I won't read you the slide. But when we compared users to non-users, I like to say to know you should be to love you, so someone who's using it should rate it higher, because that's a good sign. And that was true for 3 of these. Visiting a city park, if they go to the park, they're likely to rate it higher. Going to a library, they're likely to rate it higher. Going to a rec center, again, likely. The fact that 57.5% contacted the city by phone, internet, or in person here is very important to me because courtesy was the top driver of satisfaction. So we know that 57% of the households had some interaction. All right, so what else predicts residents' overall satisfaction with city services? Again, this was a little analysis we do. I don't always tell everybody, but what we did was we counted up for each person how many yeses they had on that prior question to if they went to a rec center, park, beach, library, museum, or cultural activity. So a person could have a 0, they said no to everything, or a 1, or a 2, or a 3, or 4, or 5. direct relationship between the number of things they do and their satisfaction. So what you have is they're interacting with the services that you're offering, and they're happy. It's all a good thing. I had 27.1% of the people say yes to all 5 of those things. They're using all 5 of them. I had 5% say no to all of them, and everybody was staggered in between. We asked a little open-ended question about how you prefer to get information about city programs, services, and issues. And these things have changed over the years. It's really cool. The city's website and email from the city, those are low-cost communication things. And look, they're the big wedges. 25% say they prefer to get information from the website. If I'd asked that question 20 years ago, way different answer. It would have been something very expensive. So we're seeing people now taking these less expensive, having an interest in less expensive ways to be reached. Social media is in here, but it's in the miscellaneous other because it fell below the 3%, and so we had to put them all together in one wedge, but social media did show up. Then we asked a series of statements, and we asked people if they strongly agree, disagree, or strongly disagree with the statement. In this case, I'm combining strongly agree and agree so that you can see them together. Virginia Beach is a good place to live. This just like makes me dance. If I didn't have a broken ankle, I'd dance a little more. It's a good place to live. 96% agree. For the most part, I can conveniently access city services. 94.6% agreed with that. Safety, it's a safe place to live. 94% agreed with that. My neighborhood is a safe place to live. 90% agreed with that. These are really wonderful scores. When we flip to the next page, houses in my neighborhood are well maintained, 88.7. Overall, I receive a good value for my city tax dollar. To me, that's like a litmus test question. It's what you pay for and what you get. That has to be a good transaction for taxpayers to be happy. Got a slide coming up that we'll talk about that in a minute. Knowing how to inform the city about how you feel. Everybody doesn't want to do this. Believe me, they don't. But they want to know that they can. 73% agreed. And then the last one is negatively worded, so agreement isn't always a good thing. But the roads I use in Virginia Beach are generally too congested. 72%. Clearly a little room for improvement there. Now, I mentioned that the value for the tax dollar is sort of a litmus test question. It's very important. It's transactional. What predicts resident satisfaction with the value received for their tax dollar? Did a little regression analysis. Here are the items, 6 items in order. This is where they say this is a good transaction, a good value. When there's maintenance of roads and bridges are good. Drinking water, wastewater collection services are good. Overall appearance of the city looks nice. Level of communication with residents is there. The 911 emergency center, in case I need it. And then the public school system. These are the top 6 drivers of people feeling that their tax dollars are well spent. I just like this one. You didn't really need to see all the history, but I just like it. The percent who think Virginia Beach is a good place to live. This has never wavered in all these years. It's just so cool. 96% think Virginia Beach is a good place to live. And there it goes back to 2003. Then we just put a few of these slides up so that you could see that in the other analysis that comes with this report are things that are broken out by zip code, and I just kind of wanted to give you an idea of what it might look like. What we want to avoid is red and yellow, or you can call that dark pink, I guess. I'm red. But those are where less than 80% of the people in that particular zip code are satisfied with that thing. Well, the first one is city services overall, and you see no red, no yellow. Some happy campers, especially in 2, 3, 4, 5, 7. Can I tell you? Okay, overall appearance of my neighborhood. Still no red, no yellow. And I have some happy people here and a lot of people that are 90% or above. So the overall appearance of my neighborhood rated very well by zip code. 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 5, 4, and 5, 3 were the happiest. Okay, now we have condition of streets in my neighborhood, which we know is a huge challenge to keep those streets all perfect. I'm seeing no red, but a little bit of yellow and some variation, different parts of the city. Just my example so that you could see that there are other analyses that could be done. We asked an open-ended question of people, and they could say anything they wanted. What do you think would make Virginia Beach a better place to live? Just give us some ideas. This is called a Wordle, word cloud, whatever you want, and the size of the font relates to how often a comment came up. Again, it was an open-ended conversational type thing. 10% said, you know what? I can't think of anything to make it better because I really do think it's fine just like it is. 9.2% referred to traffic flow, 8.3% building roads, 4.8% said it'd be nice if you could lower my taxes, and 4.6% said more jobs would be dandy. So there are all kinds of breakouts of the detail of that information, but I thought the little word cloud just gave you the gist. This is here only so that you could see that we included a full cross-section of residents in the study. The actual demographic breakouts are in the report. And to summarize, it's just really clear to me that residents perceive that they have a nice quality of life here. And the thing is, they kind of have sort of a Virginia Beach, my hometown, kind of sense of connectedness to the city. Sometimes people live in a community and it's just like where they live. But I don't get that feeling. When I listen to these interviews, I really have a sense of people feeling very connected, that this is their place. It's an attractive place, 91.7%, very satisfied. They're satisfied with the appearance. It's a safe place to live. 94% said it's safe, and even 90% said their own neighborhood is safe. I think the public appreciates what you do because 80% really said they got a good value for their tax dollar, and that is going some because, you know, taxes, nobody likes to pay taxes. As departments focus on providing easy access to their services, it's great to hear that 94.6% of the residents say, I can conveniently access the city services I need. I heard a lot of comments about people liking to do things online and how you guys are staying with the times, all good stuff. 94% were satisfied with city services overall, and when we asked what could make it a better place to live, they asked you to just continue to focus on those difficult things like traffic, new roads, and bring in some more jobs if you get a chance. Residents appreciated the opportunity to express how they feel about living in Virginia Beach. There were 9 pages of comments that they made, but I leave you with these few cute quotes. I wouldn't choose to live anywhere else. Virginia Beach is such a vibrant town with so much happening. I'm really excited about the schools here. That's a good one. There's so many things here that we could never find elsewhere. When we're staying here even after my husband retires from the military. And the last one, when relatives visit from Ohio, they're envious of our lifestyle. Oh, that was nice.
It should be.
Thank you. Happy to answer any questions. I did it as fast as I could.
Thank you very much, Jim.
So Nancy, do you do any other localities that?
I do.
So can you tell us how we rate generally? I mean, that's.
I just hate answering that question because I don't know how to do it without betraying another client.
I mean, if you can't reveal it, that's fine.
But let me just say, you guys are stars. You're movie stars. There are a number of
Globes or?
no, you're movie stars. There are a number of them available on other localities' websites that they put out there to share, and some of them use the same scale that you use here, very satisfied, satisfied, dissatisfied, very dissatisfied. Don't compare yourself to one that doesn't use that type of scale because it's apples and oranges. But you do really well. What I usually say, if someone asks me, you know, over lunch and I'm not standing in front of a microphone, is I tell them shiny and new is always better than old. And there's a sense of shiny and new here. There's just a sense of
Very good. Other questions or comments? Yes, ma'am? Oh, I'm sorry. Council, I do not want to get into something so important and do it in 10 minutes with the, the showing of transit development, if that's okay. But I do, council, with y'all's permission, I'd like Doug to get Julie to send a letter from me representing all of you to the city staff about these results. Because, ladies and gentlemen, they're the ones that got these results, and we sincerely want them to know how much we appreciate their hard work, and we hope they feel as proud of these results as we did. Is that okay?
Courteous. I mean,
Disney
that's
World would
incredible.
be envious of that courtesy part, and they focus on that quite a bit.
You do that, my friend?
Absolutely, obviously be our absolute pleasure.
Oh,
Mayor,
yeah.
I think because several of your planning items were pushed from the 26th to the 2nd,
We can
I think
stick-
Barry can
let's
do this
do it.
briefing in 10
Do it
Well,
minutes.
very
if we have to
fast.
go a few more 10 minutes, I'm not worried.
All right. But let me just say, it must be all that good planning why the citizens are so satisfied. I was expecting to get more from that, but that's all right. All right, so, yeah. Yeah, I know.
I wouldn't have that on you.
All right. Go to the next, you can go to the next slide. You saw these before, and because of advertising issues, they are not on the agenda until next week. So we have discussed every one of them here before. I'll go over them very quickly. The first one, Jesse Stevenson, is a conditional use permit for soccer lacrosse field at St. Nicholas Catholic Church. Danielle Good, if you remember, was a tattoo parlor and cosmetic vocational school on Virginia Beach Boulevard. John Figuera is a subdivision variance, a very simple moving of a property line so that the bulkhead of the one property can be included in it. Virginia Beach Travel Soccer is a conditional use permit for a travel soccer indoor facility. Very low, relatively low from what it was zoned to be able to do as far as use and traffic. And that is behind the neighborhood Walmart on Holland Road, right? Okay, I'm trying to remember. And then we have another tattoo parlor, Whiskey River, and if you recall, you passed an ordinance previously that allowed these to be located in these locations. And the last one is ordinance by the City of Virginia Beach to amend Section 801 of the City Zoning Ordinance related to requirements of farm stands. Only farm stands in O2. No farm stands in agricultural areas of the southern part of the city. And it's really one farm stand on First Colonial Road right now. So that's, does anybody have any questions on those? All right, let's jump ahead. And so for the 16th, we have some very, very straightforward one, a modification of conditional use permit, the Sums bulk storage yard. It is currently a bulk storage yard. It is completely buffered. It is just a minor change in the conditions and the plan. Oceanfront Investments is the Cavalier Hotel, and I'm going to go into that one in a little more detail. The next two are subdivision variances, which have to do with access to a non-city right-of-way. Discount Tires, we have two of them, one in, one in Lynn Haven and one in Rosemont. And they are conditional use permits because they are automobile repair. They are extremely well buffered, well planted. There's no opposition. And the conditions and appearance of the buildings are very good with good materials. And the last one is Take 5 oil change, which is on Lynn Haven Parkway, near Lynn Haven Mall, which is a new infill project where what was the drive-through? Rallies. So Rallies has gone down. There's there's more impervious surface, and there is a Take 5 oil change going in place. If you could jump ahead to the Cavalier, Oceanfront Investment. Oceanfront Investments, this was the most discussed item on the Planning Commission agenda. It is a subdivision variance related to the Cavalier Oceanfront development. The issue is that, go to the next slide. The issue is that parcel 2A is where the beach club, the new beach club is being developed. That new beach club needs to be developed before the hotels, and it is a amenity for the residential and the historic hotel. It is financed by a different group of financing mechanisms than the other two. It needs to go ahead and be platted separately. So it does not have access to the public right-of-way. It will have a easement to the public right-of-way and ultimately, and will be, have access through this point. So that is the subdivision variance. It is no unusual use, different use, that kind of thing. It's exactly what was intended. It's simply in order to finance that project, they need it to be subdivided separately. If you have any questions on any of them, I can answer those questions, and if you want to, I can go through them in detail.
Anybody have any questions?
I think this one, the Cavalier one, is the one that got the most discussion at the planning department. The rest are conditional use permits or variances to subdivision agreements related to properties that were built, or not built, but recorded many, many years ago.
Any questions, comments? Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
We'll start in 5 minutes. Have, in the formal session, please.